tirelessly over the summer. So I know if you guys have been part of town halls before or follow any of us on Twitter, we've talked a lot about the building blocks to autonomous communication modules that we've been working on. We've officially submitted everything over to EduPass. So now it's out of our hands. But what we initially thought was going to only be 9 modules ended up being 12 because we just kept thinking of new information that we wanted to share and didn't want to have the modules be longer than an hour. So it's great. We're excited. We're hoping they'll be released next month, but we will be like singing from the rooftops when they actually come out next month, hopefully. That's what we have going on.
Yeah, that's great news. There are more and more kind of multi sets of presentations that are going up on some of these formats, and I really like it. I was talking with Beth Poss about the one that she's going to be doing on Accessible, and I'm probably going to be doing one there on emergent writing for a series of training. So yeah, I think it's a nice forum. People can attend them live. They can, watch them on demand. I think it's a nice way of delivering information for people that I think some of us have gotten so used to getting our professional development online. Mm-hmm. And even with the return of in-person conferences, what I'm hearing from, and maybe this is, a question from the group is, how are people being allowed to or not allowed to get out to in-person conference events?
Yeah, I feel like from what we hear, it's kind of a mix. It depends on the district. One of the biggest issues has been finding sub coverage. So it's not even so much that they aren't willing to send them, it's that they don't have anyone to be there with students. And so that's partly where these modules came from too, is that we have all gone to PD. At least I know the first time I went through Dave and Karen's comprehensive literacy training, I was so excited to go back, but there are bits and pieces that I missed. And thankfully we have Project Core and we had DLM PD. But when we really created these modules, we knew we weren't recreating the live training. It was more of that idea of just-in-time PD, so that if I go to, a session and something isn't pertinent yet, but I need to be able to have somewhere where I can go back to it. And I think, Kelly, we're seeing a lot more of kind of that hybrid of how can we do it in person, but how can we meet the needs of people where they're at? And like Carolyn said, we tried to keep them less than an hour because people don't have that time. A lot of ours are like 15, 20, 30 minutes. So it's not everything, but it's kind of like, here's what you need to know to at least get started. What are you guys seeing in the places that you guys are, or how are you guys experiencing PD? Like, what are you guys doing for your own professional learning and growth?
Yeah, Jennifer brought up a really good point in the chat that turnover is a really, really big factor. And we're seeing it at all levels. I'm sure you guys are seeing that too, but not just with teachers, but parapros are leaving. We're seeing new administrators coming in. And so then you kind of, if the process hasn't been, solidified at that point, you have to kind of recreate it, or they have to be brought up to speed on it. And we're having a hard time with some of our administrators who, we're in our second year of partnership and they're like, so what is this? And what are we teaching our students? And what are we telling our staff? I'm like, gosh, we needed a better system to make sure that everyone's on board when they come in. So that onboarding piece is huge.
I just add that I think it's even happening mid-year instead of like it used to be. You saw a lot of turnover in the summer, but now we're seeing teachers, paraprofessionals, even administrators leaving throughout the entire year. And so we may do a training at the beginning of the year, a live training, but then the information continues to be needed throughout the entire year, which makes it difficult. that asynchronous training is really nice in that sense. And then the way that we have been utilizing things like the Project Core videos are that we're watching them on our own time in small snippets, and then reserving the little bit of time that we may have for collaboration for those discussions and how to apply it. So we're not spending all of the time together learning when we can do that individually. We're really saving that time to have those important conversations. How do we apply this towards our students to meet our classroom's needs?
Yeah, I love that idea, that conversation piece. And I think figuring out what does it look like for my kids versus being able to just kind of talk about it in general is such a huge thing.
Can I ask a question about and I'm Natalie, by the way, from Western. I've been off all summer, so I don't know if the meetings happened all summer or not, but anyway, this is my first one back, so it's good to see a few faces I recognize from last year. I have a question. How are people, or what kind of system are you putting in place to review things that you had created or maybe inherited? I have a situation where I'm doing some co-teaching with an instructor who's a new instructor. Our instructor, an instructor on the campus retired, and so this person was hired. So she inherited all his modules and stuff like that from his Canvas course. And so she asked me to look over some AT modules that were in his course. And it was an AT module that I did not create. And I'm looking through it because she was wondering, she has some time in person or live on Zoom, and then some part of her class is asynchronous. And I was like, oh, wow, like some of the materials were generated like in 2005. It still references No Child Left Behind. A lot of the information about assistive technology and consideration and stuff like that, that was all still pertinent and relevant, but it just seemed it hadn't been updated in however many years. And so then that kind of made me think about my own things that I'd created, a few years ago. And so do people have a system? Like, do you try to intentionally set aside time, in the fall or the spring or summer or whatever, and review materials? Because that's something I thought, wow, I probably need to come up with something so that, and just tweak things a little bit each year, but it's not something I feel like I can do all the time. Like it's just too much to try to do all the time. So any insights on that?
I wish I could say that it was systematic. I've had stuff that's been out there for a while, and there are some things that I write to whoever's posted them and ask them to take it down because the content is so old. So I do try to keep an eye on when things I've done get posted, like on YouTube, and we'll go back and say, listen, you need to take this down. And most people have been pretty, fine with that. But other like ongoing training, like AT boot camp that we do every year, it's getting revised right now to be delivered again in January. So, I mean, we do that as a team of people, and we just kind of split it up. And a lot of times the other thing we do, because some of us have done the same modules in boot camp every year, we swap. So like Murata and I have swapped modules. I think, we've turned some things over to Mike Cole that Scott Marfilius used to do. And so it's nice when, like you are getting your eyes on a past colleague's material. So you have something to start with. You're not starting with scratch. And then you can, take out the things that the referent is so old and then boost up. And, I try to do a lot to boost up the images that are on it. But it seems like some of those trainings that cycle around every year, they need a good, or multiple times, they need a good look every year because of the rate that things change. And for me, it seems to be that just in time, like we're getting ready to train this in 2 months. So now, let's put it on everybody's agenda because it'll take that long till people work it into their schedules.
Yeah, we do kind of the same thing. Like, again, Kelly, we don't have like a defined process. Like every June, we're going to get together and look at all of our PLOs and everything that's on our website. But every time we look a lot at our participant feedback. And last summer, we have a statewide team of literacy trainers, and we really stepped back to our literacy training and said, how can we make this more impactful for our participants? What do they need to know when they leave the sessions, and how can we make it easier for them? And I will say having a team made it so much easier, because then it doesn't feel like everything is resting on your shoulders. And then having a thought partner, like Carolyn and I work together a lot. And so we've done a lot of, last year was our first year doing building blocks. And so after each session, kind of sitting back and saying, oh, like that felt like it was a little bit flat. What could we do differently? So it's not so much like we set aside a specific time of year, but it's more just part of the process of rolling out those PLOs. We know with the modules that in a year from now, we're going to be updating and changing things that just didn't work the way we thought they would. But I think it's just kind of that continuous improvement. Thanks, Carolyn. Yes, PLO is the partnership learning opportunity. Sorry.
Natalie, the other thing that I do is I have a folder for every webinar that I do. And as new things come up, and I have them electronically and like right here at my side. So if I got something in print or something came in the mail or something I printed off, and I stick that in that folder. So then when I go to teach that, do that training again, I pick up that folder and like, oh, okay, here's the new things that I have to include. So like I am famous for ripping apart magazines. The AAC journal comes and I'm like, and the RESNA journal come and I rip stuff up. And then I put them in those folders so that I'm looking at that when I go to, put the next work on that slide deck and put it into a handout.
I like that. That's a good tip, because then when you're reviewing for when you're going to be working on it, your current information is right there. You don't have to keep finding it. It's all just right there.
Yeah. Plus like 100 sticky notes. Like
Yes.
I'll write something and I'll stick that in that folder, and then I open up the folder and it's like butterflies being released, right? But
Natalie, I think you brought up a good point that's making me think beyond what we do as far as making sure that our material is current, because I know a lot of the school districts and the buildings are creating their own content, their own handouts, their own presentations. And I just know from when I worked in a school that I would just create something new, but it would still be in the shared folder. And so I don't know who's going back and visiting something from when I was still there in 2013. So I think that's a really good point and a good conversation to have. And I actually jotted a note being like, oh, I need to talk to my sites about making sure that they're reviewing or have a system or have something in place that they're coming back just to say, yeah, this all still looks good. Because the process that was in place 10 years ago might not be either what they're doing or it needs to be updated anyway. So glad you brought that up for sure.
During COVID, we also created, we call them landing pages, where we would link everything from a folder into this landing page so that everybody could find things. I think that makes it, Google Drives are great, but they're notorious for getting messy and crazy. And so I think having that landing page, almost like a table of contents, if you think about it that way, where when you add something to that folder, you're adding that resource to that table of contents or that landing page to help you keep it organized, help you find materials in there, and then also knowing when to pull things out, sort of a quick glance at what might be in there.
For that landing page, Jennifer, are you including the date it was uploaded, or is it just like the name of the document that links it to it?
I don't think it happened over COVID, so I don't think anybody was putting dates on it, but I don't see why you wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I was like, ooh, that sounds really
it was really just
does sound really good.
But you can link things into that Google Doc. So, if you put a table in that Google Doc and you put the link and the date it was added, or you could even have who added it. That way, if you wanted to go back and connect with that person, it would be an easy way. Or if you had questions related to it, you would know who to contact and who added it.
So you guys have that in a Google Doc, not a sheet? Or I'm thinking.
We used a Google Doc, but I think you could do it in sheets. Anything where you can link in that document, which any of the Google products too.
Such a good idea. Okay, this is now on my to-do list. Thanks, Jennifer.
Well, and I like that idea too, because you could always, regardless of what you create, maybe for a specific reason, you can always put some type of comment in there to refer to that document or sheet. And then for current information, like to find the most current information about this, here's a, go to this link or whatever. And then in a way, you're kind of maybe only having to update one thing.
Mhm.
I mean, you probably should update all of it, but at least at the very least, you're kind of able to in real time update one document instead of going back or letting all these people know, hey, take this out or add this or, whatever to all these things. Because I'm thinking about different courses that I do some instruction in, and I might have one document that I send out to everybody for them to add into their Canvas courses. And so it might be nice, but then I can update my main document, and then maybe each year they could just go in and download the updated version or something. Then I'm not responsible for giving them the replacement in a way. So I kind of like that idea. The other thing I think I like about Sheets, maybe as opposed to a doc, but everybody's different, their own organization thing, is for our my regional kind of AT group that I help kind of support. We have kind of like, we adopted it like from the AT Smackdown, where people can put tools or resources that they have found useful. And we have a sheets for that. And then each area, is a separate page. So it's communication or daily living skills or executive function or writing or reading, whatever the support is. And so part of me is thinking like in a sheets, you could have those resources based on literacy or math supports or behavioral supports or, kind of whatever. That might be a better way to organize it than you just go to that one sheet as opposed to trying to find that heading on a Google
I
Doc.
wrote categories. Like, I
Yeah,
wrote that, I was like,
categories, so sheets, and then we had it color,
important.
like I've
Yeah.
color coded it. So even the title, the tab is the color, the page is all the same color. And so it's kind of easy to find something. So that's just an organization strategy that helps our group for that. And I could see it being really helpful for something like this, a landing page, like a landing sheets almost. But yeah, I like that idea of putting the current information there and dating it. That's one thing I kind of did too, is that I started doing as I created materials, like on my footer line, I put the date, that I created it. So then as I'm reviewing it, I can think, oh, wow, that's 3 years old. I probably ought to go up and see it. Because the thing too is like things change, like apps, especially if you're talking about any apps, they become unsupported or they go away or new ones get added. So some of those supports change so much, it's really hard to keep up with. So now I kind of have a little footer on all my pages that I date things, and that's just a helpful thing for me. So
I think that's a great idea because we, like for our trainings, we do a lot of Google Sites so that people who come to the training can go back to it afterwards, and they have a link to all the slide decks, and there's a Padlet that anyone in the state can access so that if they have questions, they can put those there, kind of that frequently asked questions page. But we don't date any of our stuff. And like, even in my mind, like I'm thinking about when I go back and look at my Google Drive, there are so many trainings that look really similar, but there might be one thing changed. And so I wrote on a sticky note to add that date to everything that we do from now on. Because I typically, what I do is I just go in and I delete a slide deck when we've updated it and I add a new one and I don't think anything of it. But I also think there's benefit to looking back at where we were and kind of that progression of how far we've come and maybe why. How many of you guys offer like professional development, or do you kind of organize the professional development in your districts or your organizations? Kelly? Yes, we are all going to be very, very organized when we're done with this. If nothing else, we're going to all have a bunch of sticky notes of things to do after this session.
Well, and just like Jennifer said about how, Google Drives can, I mean, you just start throwing things in there. I get things and then I link them into like my writing supports and whatever, all those different categories I've got a drive for that I put stuff in. But the idea of having an organizer at the top is really, really key. And my other problem with drives that get crazy are my individual students. We've got them in Google Classroom, but then everybody, like, then they don't, they link their stuff, but then things get thrown into her Google Drive. And I find that every month I'm organizing classroom. How did somebody, what category did they put this in for her? And where's this document now? And it's nice that we can share things, but then it's like the organization of it, and not everybody's brain thinks the same. So we kind of found for one of my students that's a totally online student, we found kind of using categories by subject area. And then there's those other kinds of things like communication isn't really a subject area, and life skill things aren't really a subject area, but it's hard and getting everybody on board with the organization once you've got it, right? Because not everybody thinks that way. So I don't know anybody's got any tricks for organizing individual students' Google Classroom drives. I'm all ears.
I don't have any helpful hints, Kelly, but I think, like goes back to the trapper keeper, that's just a skill that you have to learn, like whether you were keeping your trapper keeper and your assignment notebook organized, you just have to have an organizational method. And when I think about like, even like, just keeping that standardized and keeping that format, whether it be, paper-based or electronic, finding something that works for that individual and then sticking with it, I think is the biggest thing.
And
My
I'm
7th grader
speaking,
is struggling right now. Trying to keep. Adeline, did you get your homework done this weekend? Yep, Mom, as her eyes were this big. And I'm thinking, I know what she'll be doing on her bus ride this morning. We all struggle with it. My to-do list, like how many to-do lists do I have? And I need to just pick one method and stick with it, right? Like it's just that organization is just something that we all struggle with.
and I have a middle schooler too, who now our district is a 1-to-1 when they hit middle school. And what we're finding is it's so confusing because every teacher's Google Classroom is organized a little bit different. And some teachers use Google Classroom, other teachers don't. Some people are paper-based, some people aren't. And if I could say anything, is trying to get the team together to really say, like, as a 5th grade unit, what are we going to do for our students and how do we want to communicate home with families? We haven't won that battle yet here, but I can say, I'm a pretty organized person. I find joy in organizing things. Like Carolyn knows this. It's like my guilty pleasure is organizing things and making them make sense. And I still have not figured out how to I'm checking 3 or 4 different ways every day to help make sure that we're doing things. And I think for me, one of the biggest things is, to this point, we haven't seen that they're teaching the kids how to access the tools that they're given. It's kind of just like, hey, here's Google Drive, your, Google Classroom, figure it out, versus showing them, here's how you can go inside of Google Classroom and this is what you can do. And I think that's the huge part, Kelly, is how do we get our students to take that ownership themselves to be able to kind of figure out, how do I learn? And so in our house, that's this huge conversation we keep coming back is, 5th grade isn't about the grades. It's about learning, how do you learn best and what do you need? Are you somebody that's a high tech versus a low tech? Yeah. I love to organize. That is my guilty pleasure.
I feel like Cassie Frost is like the queen of executive functioning, but you think about all the executive functioning skills that are needed for keeping that organization, you know, I think that it is definitely a skill. And in my kids' district and in the district I work in, we are one-to-one with devices in second grade. And they use Seesaw either through fourth grade in my kids' district and fifth grade in the district I'm in. And then they transition, even starting in fourth or fifth grade, into dabbling in Google Classroom and getting those kids prepared. But what do our special ed students need in order to make that successful? Because what's working for our regular ed students, just like, you know, those paper-based things don't always work for our spec ed students electronically, they may need some of those supports. And, you know, maybe more of that AT service or that special ed, you know, teacher not being a place, but being a service, you know, maybe that is a skill that needs to be written into the IEP explicitly, and that student needs to have some training in how to organize some of those electronic formats.
Well, and I've had conversations with others about how there's almost this myth, I guess, that young people are so computer savvy. And part of that is they're not afraid of computers and technologies. They'll dive right in and try to figure things out, but they're really social media savvy, and they're game savvy, and they're movies savvy, they're entertainment savvy with computers. And so I think there's this myth that, well, if you give a student a computer, then they're going to just take off and go. But they don't. They need that guidance and training and skill set building about organization and how to use it as a tool and not an entertainment. And so I have kind of found that was a little bit, you know, lacking when I was in the school districts and we were moving into a one-to-one type, you know, thing. And again, that the disconnect between the consistency of who was using computers, you know, who was using a digital kind of format for stuff and who was still as a teacher and who was still managing the classroom using pen, paper sorts of things, was a frustration for, you know, the students, especially at the middle school and high school level. And so some consistency, I think, would have made that transition to a one-to-one a little bit better. But there needs to be, I think, explicit instruction about, here are organizational tools to help you. Here are some things to help you dabble around with it, figure out what works for you. Because we think that they really know a lot about it, but they don't. They know about some parts of it, the stuff that would be age appropriate for 10 and 12 and 15-year-olds, right? But they don't really know how to use it as a tool to help organize their lives and their schoolwork. So it's almost like that needs to be built into their everyday stuff.
And I think, just to add to that, when I look at some of the staff that are supporting our students, we have some paraprofessionals, we have some classroom teachers that aren't comfortable with the technology either. And so if those are the people supporting the students and they don't know how to find something in Google Classroom or Google Drive, that's a huge problem.
And so I'm thinking, this makes me think almost like that, what we were talking about earlier with that real time, you know, just in time kind of instruction, like some modules. And I don't know how many districts, I don't work in the school districts anymore, so I can't speak to this, but are there, you know, 5, 10, 15-minute snippets available? I mean, you can find them anywhere on YouTube. I mean, it doesn't have to be something from your district, but is there a resource that teachers could go to about, how do I search for a file in Google Drive? You know, because some people don't even know that you can just search, just use the search bar. I mean, even on your phone for app, if you're just looking for certain apps or whatever. So just some basic resources about some of that might be helpful for school districts to have, a landing page, so to speak, for those sorts of things, that a student or a teacher could just click on the link and see the 5-minute YouTube video on how to do it, or the quick little, you know, article to read about how to do it. Just some of the basics of managing Google Drive or 365 or whatever it is your district uses.
What's the
That's
thing
really-
I really appreciate about teaching in Moodle? Like Moodle had that structure, and it has, it's just that people don't really use it anymore, you know, and where you came in and the links were right there and the sections were already pre-built for you. You didn't have to think it through, you know, from scratch. And it just was, it was a nice format for doing online training and online organizing.
So we are a grant through the Michigan Department of Ed, but all of our funding is sourced through one of the ISDs here in Michigan, and they do something called Tech Tips. And for the longest time, I was like, this is amazing. Like they're getting assistive technology out there. And then I started reading through and I was like, this is just how to navigate Google. What is this? So I think some districts are doing that. At least we have some here. But I love the idea of having that landing page for it, because I couldn't tell you where in the weekly emails that come out that I honestly sift through and I look and I'm like, no, I'm deleting this quickly. But I couldn't tell you where some of those, how to find a file in Google is, or like how to create this document, or how to share and edit the viewing rights or the ownership of some of these documents. Because it's astounding to us now, especially in education, that there are still teachers who don't know how to do that, or don't, like, if they're requesting for access, that they only have to do it once, because we'll get emails for it every time that they come in and ask us for access for it. And I think the other piece on the flip side is working with parents on that, and those mini lessons on, how do you Google about tools that could already exist? And I did a webinar last year with one of our other Michigan grants, and it was all about Google. And I was like, is this too like dumbed down? And the parents like, this is amazing. What words do you search? You can't just look at AT, because that's just going to pull up at everywhere. You really have to be assistive technology. And like, how do you know if it's a reputable source? And I felt just like, I was like, these are just things I've figured out naturally. But for those who aren't trying to figure it out actively all the time, they kind of get stuck in that rut of, I just don't know. I'll wait for somebody to tell me where it is or what to do, or I'll just live with it and keep putting in complaints to the school that my student doesn't have the tools that they need, or I see them struggling and I don't know how to support them at home. So I know some schools are doing the tech tips, like they are existing, and I don't think it would be hard to cultivate a landing page, because I'm sure those videos exist on YouTube somewhere already. It would just take a few minutes to either create them yourself or find them.
Caroline, I think you brought up a really good point too, of that communication that we have with homes, and how do we facilitate that homeschool partnership? Because especially as we're explicitly teaching students how to use assistive technology or AAC or Google Classroom or anything, families can be such a huge part of that, and to empower them to know that, yes, there is a role and a place for me, and this is how I can support my student at home. And unfortunately, I feel like what we see a lot of is teachers are overwhelmed. We talked about this on the very first AT chat. So this is week 3 of AT Town Hall. So on week 1, we talked about how people were already saying like, hey, I'm burnt out, and it's just the middle of September. And it feels like a lot of times that's one more component where sometimes I sit back and I wonder, if we really engage parents more as an equal partner, would we feel less burnt out? Because we'd have somebody, maybe not all kids, but a lot of families really want to be invested in what their students are learning at home. And so is there a way for us to cultivate the resources we're talking about, but to make them parent friendly, to help engage them in their child's learning? No.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, Sarah. And I'm lucky that, I've got virtual students, and so families are very engaged. And I've got one mom that's very tech savvy. And so it's so but like how her brain works is not the same as how my brain works, but we do, work it out. And, she'll see things and send them to the team electronically. And then it's like, but where does that fit into the big picture? And I think sometimes the whole virtual piece is then who's responsible for this idea, right? Like who's going to do, this is a great tip. I'll see something like on Carol Zangari's website and send it out. And then it's, who's, just because I sent it doesn't mean it's on my to-do list, right? But it might end up being there at least to get the person started who it might fit more into their wheelhouse or their position on the virtual team. But it is great having that parent partner who really is with it. And, you know, at the end of each session, we talk about where vocabulary is on her system, or what we're doing with writing. And then there are things that she does with her child between when that time and when I see her again. Or the next time I see her, she'll say, oh, you remember what we talked about Friday? I did all of that this weekend. I'm like, it's great. But I have really no programming responsibility for one of my students at all, because the mom takes all that on. But she does it like, I've had some parents in the past that do that. And then you're like, okay, well, let's talk about where you put things, where she talks about it up front with all of us before she dives in and just does it. So it's really, it's a great place to be. That is not everybody that I see.
And I think going back, talking about parents, going back to, the old days when we were kids, we'd come home with our math test. We would come home with our math work sheets that we were doing. But with everything being so electronic, classrooms are using Google Forms to take assessments, and they are submitting work in a Jamboard, or whatever the tools may be. In my kids use Seesaw. Seesaw has a nice parent component where they can push out like some of that work, and if you have the parent app, you can see what they're doing. But in like my middle schooler who's using Google Classroom, I have her logged into Google Classroom on one of our devices, and I can go into her Google Classroom and see some of what she's doing. And yeah, we're getting grades pushed out through our electronic grade book, but that 3 out of 4 doesn't mean anything to me if I'm not seeing that work. And not every parent is super involved, but I think, if parents don't have an understanding of how these tools work and how they can view their child's homework, and we're not doing some of that training, then, there's that disconnect again, and they can't help support their child at home either if they don't know how to use those tools, like we were saying.
Are any of you providing workshops or handouts or trainings or collaborating with other educators who are sending some of this home to parents? Not yet.
At
Okay.
the elementary level, I think we have a lot of our ID classrooms that are using Seesaw, things like that. And so that has, that they have a pretty easy, like they have an app for parents that you can
Mhm.
kind of push that out to. And then our AT department does a lot of trainings, like when we're pushing out a communication device, we're meeting with that family and we are teaching them how to do programming, or if we're doing Snap and Read or Read and Write for Google or something like that, then we're meeting with those parents if they want, because they are part of that IEP team. So we are meeting and doing training. I organize a lot of my trainings, a lot of my resources using Google Slides. That way, if parents need to learn how to program that button, that just in time again, then I can link, the video from, PRC's website on how to program a button, or if I've created my own videos, I can link it right in there, and then they can go back and they can view those things again, those resources again. And then I share those Google Slides with the entire team. Sometimes that includes outside agencies if we have permission, so that they're all on the same board, same page as we are. And even like what Kelly was talking about with programming, everybody's thinking critically then about where are we putting those words, because we can keep track of it sometimes in that format as well. I should also add in sometimes videos of the students using those tools. That way, historically, we can share that set of Google Slides with teams as that student moves or progresses, from grade to grade. That way they can see what they were doing last year or 2 years ago and have a little bit more of that history behind how that tool has evolved in that use.
That's so great because videos can be so helpful, not only to show parents what it looks like if they're doing it correctly, but also to kind of show parents like, yeah, your student can do these things. Like they are doing what we're saying that they're doing. And also kind of give that push of why they should be using these tools at home. So I love that you're taking video, and I wonder if anyone has any ideas of how to get or convince either our educators or our ancillary staff or our parents to take more video. I feel like so many people are afraid to be behind, like in front of the camera, when really it's just, we're all getting up there kind of just acting silly at the moment. Like, yeah, we'll be as professional as we can, but if something happens, it happens. Which just shows the reality of it. Like, are you guys successful with getting some of your teachers on board with filming during class, like using some of these tools to share how they work?
I build a video into my trainings. And so when I have kind of long-term contract, like school year long contracts, where I'm delivering information and then the staff go back and they video themselves, implementing that new information, or when we're first trying to figure out what issues might be, then they video the student. And I'm telling, don't give me anything longer than 5 minutes. Like 2 minutes is great. They can't always show everything in 2 minutes, but like that 2 to 4 minute window is really good. And if you can get them to do that monthly of the child in the same activity, it also helps with helping them do data collection and tracking it, because then you don't have the variable of the changing activity. So we've done that for writing, and when school districts have been implementing first author. So I'll deliver, an hour overview, and then they go back and then they collect samples. We talk about that. Some of them will do video if they've got a lot of complexity. And then our next time together, we go through it. So the incentive is that they're going to get direct feedback on their student, right? That part motivates them to do the video. And I've been using video for a long time, and everybody's scared the first time because they think that they're going to be criticized. And so I have learned that in the first hour of training with them, to show myself on video screwing up. Like really not like, oh, like here's a perfect performance, blah, 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 but real life situations. And then with me pausing it and said, I should have done, so that they see that it's not about being critical, but being suggestive. And I think that starts to get them over the hump. But still, I tell them that their first video is a baseline, and we're not really going to review it. We're going to keep that for data collection later. And we're not going to, just go back, do a video right away of how things are right now before you start to maybe do things the new way or implementing a new strategy or a new tool. And that also helps them knowing that first one is not going to really be reviewed at all, except by themselves when they look at doing data collection. So that's one way of trying it to make it a little bit more friendly. And then I've had teachers that say, okay, I video the first Monday of every month. And then they just it just becomes something in their classroom that they do. They pick one day of the week, and on the first one of that, then we're going to video, on that day. And if the kid's not there, then they do it the next day, right? So they have to always be ready for student absence or holiday, those kinds of things.
I love those ideas. Thanks, Kelly.
But I think trying to get across to people that this is not about a performance. So whether we're talking about writing or we're talking about communication or any, thing, I know people have done this with O&M instruction, that it's not about, we're trying to do some well-produced video that's going to be, out on the internet. This is for you working with your student and the strategies that we might be doing that need to improve, and how do we measure that improvement in the kid. And once you get them through the first 2 months, then they kind of roll with it. If you've got, there's a training called environmental communication teaching training that Dr. George Carlin put together, and part of the training was about adult learning and working with adults to change, and that we can't just show them the change. They have to experience the change, right, in their own world. And especially if we're trying to work on their belief systems about what assistive technology can and cannot provide for their students, so that they're going to continue it when you no longer are there, like being their coach or their mentor or their trainer or whatever, term, however it's set up to be. And so George was pretty strict on not giving people immediate feedback, but watching the video yourself as a trainer and watching it several times so you could really see the subtleties of what's going on in their classroom and with their kid and their situation. And just kind of how much, there's certain percentages that are out there that you need to give 7 good things before somebody's ready to hear something, negative. And I don't know if I always hit that mark, but I do try to, even if it's, putting things like, oh, I noticed that, and that kind of stuff in your classroom, and then say, what would you think if you tried, setting up this area, and then blah, blah, blah. Here comes the suggestion at you. So just more soft suggesting with people so they don't, as Sarah said, they don't feel as vulnerable, because people are, everybody's working so hard, right? That, like, I don't want to knock them back at all, but I do want them to improve.
And I think, Kelly, you brought it back to the students too, is that when we talk about, like, we're doing all of these things to better serve our students. So it's not so much about me, it's about how can I be, a better SLP or a better para or whatever, so that student makes progress. I think that helps people kind of go, okay, like, I'm going to take myself out of the situation, how I feel, and put my students' needs first. Which I think is huge. And one of the things that I've learned a lot over the last couple of years is, no matter how you frame it, when we talk about our practice in terms of, teaching or working with a student, it's really hard not to take that personal. And so just being really careful, when I think back to when I first started as an SLP, I came running into the classroom, probably with my cape flying behind me. And I was like, hey, like, we're here, we're going to do this. Like, here are some things you could do. And now when I look back and I'm like, that did not go really well, because I didn't recognize, like, that teacher, out of the goodness of their heart, was doing what they thought was best. And I was coming in, not having that conversation and, like, sitting down and really understanding it. And I think sometimes our best intentions sometimes build barriers or walls for people. I had quite the cape, you guys. I think back to my first days and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for all those teachers I worked with.
When I'm a teacher, and as soon as you said that, our nickname, my parapro judge and I, our nickname for the people that ran in and out of our classroom with stuff was the drop and run gang. And we loved them. Like, when they would go to these conferences and things that we could never go to because we could never get out, of the classroom. And so the SLPs and the OTs and the PTs would come back. I first started teaching in a multi-categorical preschool program. And so they would go out to trainees, and then they would come in and they would bring stuff and be like, and then they would leave. And you're like, what are we going to do with that? Like, like, oh, that looks good. Who's going to do that? We got 12 kids running around. Like, who's going to do that thing that somebody just dropped off? But that's when Judge started calling them up. Here comes the drop and run gang.
Yeah.
Well, and that's true, because you come out of school, graduate school or whatever, and you've been told you have all this, like, you're experts now, right, in your field, and these are the things that you can do to help people, save people, right? Wear your cape, save people. And then you go, but you're not an expert at classroom management. You're not an expert at teaching, right? And so you're the expert of your one area, but you're not an expert of the whole thing. And so I have had similar experiences too, as a new grad or new to an environment. It's like, I come in, I'm going to change the world. And then it's like, wait a minute, you don't know the context. You don't know any of this kind of stuff. And so So yeah, and actually, like you talk about the barriers, that does create the barrier, right? And so the best experiences that I've had was when we got together as a team and talked about all the things, and here's how my piece can support what the whole team, needs. And yeah, so but it is you're just, they send you on your way as an expert, and so of course you know everything, right?
Yeah, we focus so much on content, but not on how do I function as a member of a team to help support students. So you learn a lot of that on the job training, right? Good, bad, or otherwise, it's the hard knock life. All right. We're coming up, you guys. We have 8 minutes left till we hit, it's 12 o'clock my time. I live in Central Standard. I feel like I'm probably one of the few that lives in that time zone. So does anyone else have anything you guys want to talk about before we wrap up the 4th week of AT Town Hall?
So my colleague just walked in and she showed me sort of the landing page resource that our technology department has. I can really quickly just show my screen. And she was like, oh, we have something like that. I saw somebody who did it. So I'll just show you a little bit about what that looks like. So here's some of our technology resources. And if we look at like Google Docs, it just brings me to another document that has Google Teacher Center for Google Docs, Google Support Change, change the sharing settings, and it's got just a brief description. So, I think you could organize it that way. We did it a little differently in our special ed department, but it was something kind of similar. I do like the idea of Google Sheets and having, like a tab for each one, but this is just kind of what I was looking.
I really like, Jennifer, that like the descriptor tells you whether you're going to a video or you're going to a document or like to another website. That's really helpful. Because sometimes people give you links like at the end of their presentations and you have no idea what it is you're going to.
Yeah.
And what you'll have time for.
Yep. And then it's got the description over here for Brain Pop. And those would then be, things that you could maybe share out with students, or you could just share with other staff. So.
Right. Okay, guys. Well, I'm a firm believer of if there's nothing else to say, we don't need to stick on for a couple extra minutes. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah. Sorry.
Nope.
Kelly Reynolds is having some technical difficulties, but she wants to share. Sorry.
All right. Kelly.
Hold on. Maybe she get her life together. Hold on.
Okay, I said I probably won't do that, but who knows? Did I share it? You would think that my computer is being replaced very soon, so am I actually sharing my screen? Are you seeing where it says Chromebook Accessibility? Okay, it usually has the yellow box. It's not there. This is one of the things that our team has worked on. I say our team, Dana and Jean Manley is also on our team. They pretty much, I actually had nothing to do with this. They did it all. But we store our things on Canvas. So we have like an AT Canvas page, and all of these things are linked there. But this is just one of the, I guess, the links that it would take you to just quickly show you how to do a specific task and whatever the accessibility thing is. And we have this for some like AAC basics also of implementation, some just really quick videos, and we have them for each communication app. some of the basic things you need to know, like how to find a word finder, how to customize, things like that. So I guess it's very similar to what you were using with your doc. It's just all like with links. We just really like to look at our Bitmojis because they're really fun.
This is great. Thank you for sharing that. That's another really great way to format that and share. It looks user friendly. Like if I shared that with parents, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go watch an on-screen keyboard video. With cool
That was one of the reasons we had a few things up, but it was actually just text. It was like basically it was a Google Doc with just text, like that linked you to something, and we just thought that this would definitely it was more marketable. Like I might see that and be like, oh, I will go watch that, versus clicking a link that I don't know. That's why those descriptors were great in that last one, because you could see, it kind of pops up that you're about to go watch this video, and it's just visually more engaging, or enticing, I guess is the right word, to actually look at it.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thanks for sharing.
Lots of great ideas. Now everyone go complete all the stuff on your sticky notes.
All
All right.
right.
See you
See you guys next week.